You know you can count on MarcelianOnline to know what day it is, right? It is Friday, and that means TLF. Tier List Fridays, baby. And what do we have today, Flame?
Well, today, Marcelian, we will have ranged DPS for Castle Nathria. It's that time of the month. I mean, it has been, I think, over a month since we did the DPS for Nathria. Now that we've broken them up into range and melee, it will take a little bit longer to get back. But, I mean, the meta kind of changed a little bit, but not for all of them. So do keep that in mind. That we're kind of gonna be looking at how the specs are performing right now, with also keeping in mind that most of these logs, especially what inflates the numbers of specs, are like things like power infusion, or like your entire raid stacking a specific mechanic so that you can do a good power. So that doesn't really portray the actual power of a spec and if it's worthy of being on the list.
Now, that being said, there has been a couple of changes within the mid section of the tier list, because you have to understand, not all the specs can make it to S tier, right?
But you can make it to S tier with Skillshare.
Hey!
No, but seriously, this is the perfect time to start working on yourself and learn brand new skills on one of the best online learning communities. Lots of cool classes on video editing, productivity, design, and, well, making good YouTube content.
Yeah, YouTube is something we tend to do a lot, and one of the biggest inspirations is Marques Brownlee, which, what do you know? He has an absolute blast of a class on YouTube success. Not gonna lie, even after all these years, we learned some new things on video structure, editing, posting, and all around growing a YouTube channel. If you ever thought of starting a YouTube channel or already have one and feel stuck, then be sure to check out the YouTube Success class by Marques Brownlee. I mean, I think he knows what he's talking about, right?
And you can get access to it super easy by just clicking on the link in the description, because the very first 1,000 of our subs will get a free trial of the premium membership, and after that, it's dirt cheap at under $10 a month, with access to so many other useful classes on a big, diverse pool of topics. Wanted to help us out? You can by clicking the link. It's a win-win. Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring the video, and now let's take a look at Affliction Warlock.
Alright, Affliction Warlock, the one who has started weak but rose.
I mean,
Or
Affliction
flowers.
has been systematically probably the best Warlock spec for raids for
In
the
Shadowlands. Because
Shadowlands
we
is
cannot forget BFA Destruction Warlock.
Well, no, but that was like kind of at the later
I know,
tier.
man,
But,
I know.
Affliction is realistically the best raid spec in terms of his design. Like, if the numbers are scaling way too much, then that's just a balancing issue. But in terms of design, Affliction has been the best one so far, though there are a couple of fights that Destro kind of wins out a little bit.
I'm sure of it. The whole pack and kit of the Affliction Warlock is just made purely out of like consistency. It's one of like well, I would say the best dot class at the moment, and I'm counting here, you know, bleed specs as well, like Pharaohs and Assassination Rogues too. But we'll get to melee probably next week. Assassination just has this nice consistency, and not Assassination, Affliction, man. What are you talking about?
That's what I thought you meant.
I'm thinking about Assassination for some other reasons. But no, seriously, on top of, you know, having its quite useful stuff in a raid as a Warlock spec overall, like, you know, things like the gate, you know, Hellstones for everybody, and, you know, the most important thing a Warlock can bring is the summoning portal.
Yeah, because who gets to the raid in
listen,
time? No,
you cannot do much DPS without a summoning portal. So that's being called. That being said, I still believe like Affliction didn't really change its spot from last time.
We didn't really have any changes in terms of balance or nerfs. It's
same thing.
Still kind of
S tier for sure.
It's one of the most populated specs in the top 100 best DPS players in the Nathria. Although obviously that's with, you know, power infusions and all of that, but still. Because, you know, you kind of want haste with a dot class, like a lot of haste with a dot class works really well. But Affliction is just good.
It's good. It keeps its spot. But now let's see if anything has happened to Arcane Mage. And Arcane Mage has seen some more, I would say, popularity recently. Some people play it more. I would just think that...
Actually, I was looking at the parses. There's about 1,000 parses of Arcane against the 50,000 of
Fire?
Of Frost. No, I think Fire is probably way more than that. No, Fire is 50,000. But even so, Arcane is definitely popping real numbers, and it's been rising on the meters right now, probably because more people are geared with their mage. Most people probably are switching from Fire to Arcane to, you know, like spice it up a little bit. And I think last time we had Arcane into B tier.
It was B tier, but we have to say this. Like right now, if you would take like the data and make I don't know, get 45,000 more people in playing Arcane like at the highest level, you will definitely see Arcane somewhere at least in the A tier for sure.
Could be
right?
Tier.
But people are still playing a lot of Fire Mage and possibly even more Frost Mage, so it's still a thing on the spec not being as popular, but if played right, it could dominate the DPS charts, no problem whatsoever.
There are a couple of things that are kind of holding Arcane back from competing with at least Fire, but also the other range DPS specs, which is kind of why it's keeping it still in B tier. That's probably because Arcane part does really align well, and you have Rune of Power as a core mechanic, and I mean, you've played Mage. How much do you love staying in Rune of Power all the goddamn time?
I know, man. I know. It's definitely an argument that can be made against Arcane when comparing it to like Fire Mage, definitely. And once again, even with that being said, I would still believe that if half of the population playing Fire would start playing Arcane, you would see, based on the logs, Arcane into a much higher tier, because it has the potential to deliver that. There's obviously fights that would better advantage an Arcane Mage than Fire and vice versa. But overall, I think B tier is still a safe zone for these specs. Okay, now let's check out the Beast Mastery Hunter, who finally we got some data after the buffs. I know in the M+ we didn't have enough data for it, but now we do have with the buff to Xyla.
Rylak Stalker, something legendary that's doing a little bit more damage than it was in 9.0. 9.0.5 kind of buffed it a little bit. And so far, BM has been performing a lot better. BM was never really a bad spec. It was just that Marksman, with almost no gear, Marksman just had a lot more upfront damage.
You want to talk about that Marksman log with I don't know how many power infusions?
What? But yeah, so that's the thing.
There's a lot of cheese in these logs. You have to understand.
We can talk about damage all day. But all in all, I mean, the people who have played especially in this super heavy mechanic season raid, whatever you want, we've been having people on stream coming. It's like, man, I really like Beast Mage. Like, what the hell?
Yeah,
because it's a nice break. You can move like it's the. I know somebody said this really cool. It's the ranged melee spec. Because you can just move all the time, and the amount of freedom and liberty that brings is really nice, and obviously that just lets you deal with mechanics, actually look at what things are going on around you.
It's a good argument, like to just better enjoy the game, I would say, especially in a raid environment, because once again, you can do all of the mechanics no problem, move everywhere, and still maintain a pretty decent damage. And damage has been looking better for BM, and I think last time we had it in C tier, but I think now it's climbed up to a B tier for sure. So
we would like to put it into B tier. It's doing a lot more damage. Probably a lot more marksmen are also playing BM right now.
That could also be the case. We have the argument of like half of the population for marksman will play BM. You would see it as at a higher number based on the logs. That being said, still in B, keeping it into B tier. It's moved up a spot. Pretty good. Now let's check out a big surprise for this tier list. Nobody expected Boomkin to happen. You know what happened to Boomkin? Nah, I'm just fucking with you. It's still S tier. It's up there. There's really nothing, because the thing is, guys, until like we get the 9.1 PTR like next week, these big performers, like especially in the range department, haven't been touched almost at all. So Boomkin is still a powerhouse of a spec in the raid. There's hands down one of the biggest damage that can be done, like huge bursts, huge consistency, and
it's also the mobility. And you have to realize this, guys. I don't know if Blizzard had this mentality before, but they did say that they don't want to shift the meta mid-patch, mid-season, encounter, so that specs would be. So if you like main and Boomy, because Boomy is bringing a lot more damage than a lot of the other specs, then you would feel like you have to switch. They don't want to do that, so it's likely that the S tier specs right now might not be S tier, or will at least be addressed. But Boomkin is obviously a really good, maybe it's could be one of the better design specs because it has all the mobility that a Druid has.
Yep.
Convoke is really good on priority damage, although it kind of trails off a little bit in AoE because you kind of splash things that you might not want to splash with it.
That is very true, yes,
and
indeed.
multi-dotting is amazing. Like Council is just a broken 5 for Boomy. You can just multi-dot everything and you can just funnel all that in Star Surges into your main target, and that's what actually makes it really good.
Yeah, some people would say that Boomkin is maybe a bit broken. I wouldn't say so myself. I think it's just a spec that is being really well worked out in terms of like its damage profile. I don't necessarily feel it has to be tuned down. I think other specs could be aligned better.
I think in the argument of what's OP and what's not, Boomy is maybe where you want to be with any spec in the game. Other specs might need to be a little bit...
Yeah, okay, enough with the S tier shenanigans. Let's check out Demonology Warlock, which last time was pretty high ranked up, but
last time we had it into 8 tier.
Yeah, it was 8 tier, but let's not.
Now it's not into 8 tier.
It's not. Okay, we'll keep it like that, but we have to explain to the folks why it was ranked so high last time, because there's some things.
I mean, you probably have heard about the build, the demo lock, and this is actually the cool thing about it, and also the bad thing about it is because what was it called? Demonic Consumption has been redesigned coming from BFA, where now instead of consuming the energy of your demons when you summon your turn, it actually takes away their HP from their max HP. So that means, and obviously your demons scale their HP with your HP. So the more HP you have, the more HP your demons have, and that means the more damage your tyrant will have once you eventually get it out. That essentially created pools. Like, you might have watched Kalamazi's videos on Demolock, where you had warriors pop Rallying Cry, you had Resto Shamans do the Ancestral Vigor healing so that you have 10% more HP. Obviously, you have the Priest with the Fortitude and everything that gives you an HP
more
buff.
HP and more HP.
You essentially had even Blood Decays. I think they have something that you can raise the HP of the raid, but I might be mistaken here. Even so, it's not realistic.
Yeah, so your average Demonology Warlock will not have this advantage, because basically a whole raid group will have to play around this, you know, HP gaining buff for the Demonology Warlock, and that just in reality it's not the case, you know.
It's not gonna happen if you're progressing through the raid. If you're farming it, anything goes. If you're farming the raid, anything goes. But because you're progressing it, it's not going to be a realistic scenario where everybody in the raid is gonna cater to your needs and just buff you so you can get a good performance or good log.
And then let's move it where it's supposed to be.
Right now,
I would say it's a C tier.
It's around C tier. I mean, it could be argued to be a D tier. It can still do damage now that it has a lot more gear. You could say that it deals a little bit better than a D tier. It's not. I don't think it's on the same level as.
I would say D tier is like underperforming, and I would say close to unplayable, which it is not. So Demonology Warlock is definitely it's performing decently, and it's playable. All right.
Yeah, it's playable. The fact that you can only play the Demonic Consumption build is kind of what's holding it back from actually being competitive with the other specs, and that's basically a design issue. You can still pump the damage, but the design of the spec will probably be addressed in Ep1 or at least sometime in this expansion, hopefully.
Okay, now Destro Warlock, which again has been ranked pretty high last time, but now I think this is a situation where other specs kind of moved up, and we'll look at a little bit further in the video onto that. Just Destro Lock at the moment, I think it's still one of the better pure single target specs.
And also the best in Cleave.
And with the Havoc buffs, yes, I forgot about the Havoc buff. Jesus,
crazy, man, crazy.
I mean, apart from everything that a Warlock can bring to the table, it's just like how can you see Destruction Warlock perform? I don't know, in Council. Do you think like the Havoc will have the same value?
Yes, that's the thing, right? Because you have the Dutiful Attendant that comes in, and that's the difference that we actually talked with one of the theory crafters and about this show that actually pointed out something really cool, is that, you know, when you play in Council, you have to kind of swap targets, and also again it's only generals, but that kind of changes a little bit. Affliction cannot really swap targets that efficiently because you cannot just translate your dots from one target to another. There used to be a mechanic that does that, not anymore, but Destro can do that. That's an ASAP Destro sleeve, and that keeps it consistent. And obviously, Havoc being essentially having a lot more uptime than in previous expansions, just makes double boss, double target fights probably one of the best fights for Destro, and that's usually Council, generals, so huntsman,
yeah.
sunking as well. It's pretty good. So usually, I think last time we had this show all the way up in A tier, and although it's really good,
yeah, it has some fights that really shines. It will go into B tier just because some other specs will come up when compared like to
I think we just need to like double the amount of tiers to actually accurately rank every spec against each other.
Yeah, because the reality is, guys, there's a lot of the specs can shine depending on the actual fights. So you would see things like this Warlock perform super good on council, but then you would see things like, I don't know, I would say Fire Mage, but I was thinking more of a melee compressor, like a Feral wouldn't do good over there. So if you put like these two specs together, a Feral would shine like on a Sludge Fist, pure single target. Or, I don't know.
Feral clearly takes this show in single target.
Yes, or an assassination for that matter. So this is why we only have to take this with a little bit of grain of salt. But that being said, let's not linger too much on it, and then move up to the buff boy of 905, Elemental Shaman.
Elemental, I mean, obviously received a lot of buffs, and I think translating it into this tier, if we were to be talking about last patch's Elemental, it would probably be around B tier right now.
Yeah.
Where B tier is like the specs that really pump, that are really performing really well. But Elemental did get a buff, although not as much to make it all the way into S tier.
I mean, it still cannot compete with the big boys, even with the buffs. But Elemental has always been consistent in Shadowlands, and the buffs only rose it up a little bit. So I think we can simply assume it's an A tier.
It's definitely one of the better A tier specs, and every week it seems to be doing a little bit better. So it's likely by the time we revisit this, if we're not already into 9.1 by that time, Elemental would be a little bit better than the other A tier specs at least. And Elemental is just a really good spec overall. It kind of has almost everything. If it had a little bit more mobility, it might have been one of the best range specs in the game.
Oh yeah, for sure.
With all the utility that you have ancestral guidance, I think it's called, where you just heal parties or raids based on your damage, which is also a good mechanic.
Pretty useful. I would say that if we were to have like an S plus category here and have one spec over there, I think Elemental would be on the S tier for sure.
Would probably be close this year.
Maybe we'll change that in the future and have an S plus and probably an F2 to have a little bit more broader insight and scope of how the specs would be categorized. All right, now speaking of S plus, exactly, Fire Mage. Time for Fire Mage, and as mentioned previously,
no surprises here.
Yeah, no surprises. It's definitely an S tier, probably the best spec currently in it. I've dabbled in yesterday's race for the first time in a heroic, and it definitely feels that way because there's a couple of things, right? First, you have to know how to get your combustions into order, and the buff to the disciplinary command legendary has seen an increase of presence of fire mages in the top S tier.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it's an increase in damage. It's better than the old legendary that just buffed your crit. So that's one thing. And second, I don't think there's any fight that fire mage would not perform well. Obviously, it would be like humongous in fights like the Nathrias, like Sun King, where there's like big AoEs and, Flame Strike not being kept, and you can cheese. This is another thing. You can cheese with Fire Mage. It's unbelievable how much you can cheese. Yeah, you can. And that being said, it's no surprise. I was expecting, honestly, to see Elemental maybe rival that, because I know last week when we looked, it looked like it had a chance.
Elemental has this thing going, but Fire Mage I think is just a solidly designed spec. It has a lot of damage. And it's been like one of the top specs also that the top World First guilds has stacked to get the World First kill, or at least Hall of Fame at the very least. And because you can also lower your combustion for
you basically get it to a minute. You basically get it to almost like on a minute, and there's fights like Sludge Fist and things like that where you just take huge advantage of this and pump out some big numbers. That being said, personally, it tends to get boring and stale, because there's not much. I mean, it's exciting when you have combust ready, but outside of it, you're just
that's kind of the problem with Deshra as well, is where you're just really awesome within cooldowns, but outside it's like I cannot wait for that to come back.
I guess there has to be some sort of trade-off.
Give and take.
Yeah, but let's look at Frost Mage, which I think it has risen, and I'm really happy for it because, you know, starting off in Shadowlands in the meta of the raids, you didn't really see that much play in Fire Mage, but obviously due to fire.
It's kind of also the subtlety rogue discussion where in beta it was so overpowered, and then they hit it in the head with the hammer, and
it was too much.
Although it didn't do bad, I mean it's still a mage, it has all the benefits of Fire Mage, but obviously the cooldowns are a little bit worse because you have Icy Veins a little on a longer cooldown than Combustion.
Sure.
And also the damage was not competitive with Fire Mage, but now after the buffs we have seen Frost rise a little bit in the ranks, and it's currently in B tier. I'm sorry, A tier.
Yeah.
It's not. See, this is why we need more ranks, because although it's probably better than Destro and Arcane, at least in terms of performance, from what we've seen, it's really not on the same level as Elemental. But then again, Elemental is not on the same level as the other one, so. The order here kind of matters.
Yeah, of course, and that's the thing, right? Like since last time we had it into B tier, but we definitely saw a rise in performance, at least judging from the logs available. And this is the thing, right? Frost Mage is an example of a spec where it cannot cheese off too much, you know, from like it doesn't have the same benefits from like multiple power infusions as a Firewood. It has benefits, but not as much, or as a marksman or whatever. So this is a spec that, as you know, more or less genuinely just grew in performance, right? Obviously due to the buffs, more to say, but it's on A tier right now.
It has its plus and minuses, and I think one of the biggest drawbacks that most people can agree is the fact that it's too much RNG. It has one of the more interesting procs, I feel, in terms of mage. It's one of the specs that on the core concept, the procs and the way you use those procs as shadow stuff, I think it's more interesting than what other specs can do, the other mage specs can do, but it's just a little bit too RNG. You end up just spamming frostbolts for a lot.
Yeah, well, you know, as I said, on fire, you spam firebolts, you know, outside of
I guess, yeah.
But it's fine, we just keep it there. Now, Marksmanship Hunter.
This one has been a little bit hard to place because obviously
cheese?
it has been
cheese.
Well, cheese or no cheese or no cheese. It has been probably one of the most stacked range DPSers when the raid came out.
Yeah.
It has been consistently the most used range specs, if I'm not mistaken, while the guilds were progressing to getting that Hall of Fame, that cutting edge in the first 1 or 2 months of the raid. So that just makes it a really, really good spec design-wise. In terms of damage, it's still doing really good damage. Obviously, it's taking power infusions and so on and so on.
Cheese?
But you want some cheese, man? It doesn't do as much damage as the other S tiers, but it's still
very competitive for sure.
It's definitely A tier, but it's hard to put it. I would put it in between.
Yeah, it has better numbers than Frost Mage for sure, but I don't think it outperforms Elemental at the moment. And with that being said, I do want to mention that Marksmanship was initially, for a good chunk of time, S tier, right? Because you didn't mention at the beginning a lot of people were stacking Marksman just because, you know, it did quite a lot.
It was a really good and really safe spec. But obviously was not nerfed, but it was fixed. Where within Wild Spirits, when you shot your aim shot, both the aim shot and the Serpent Sting that would proc Wild Spirits twice. So that was a component of its damage, but it still didn't deter marksmen from being really good.
Yeah, and also you had the, you know, more and more Fire Mages gearing up and getting much more and more haste, which pumped them up, because like Fire Mages at the beginning were really clunky, but once you got that haste going, got those trinkets and all of that, it was more exquisite for him. So this is why it dropped a little bit overall. Now, let's check out the last of the ranged Shadow Priest, baby.
Shadow Priest is
a love letter, I would say.
Shadow Priest is close to making it into S tier. There are a couple of things that I've managed to see that doesn't really make Shadow Priest an S tier. It's not one of the Nathria is not one of its best fights, for sure. Unfortunately,
I can see that, yeah.
But Shadow has a lot of damage potential. Obviously, it has Power Infusion for itself. So if we're going to be talking about the spec's performance outside being buffed by Power Infusion, I mean, you will have to exclude Shadow Priest because it's part of their kit, it's part of their class, And if I was a Shadow Priest, I would buff myself with Power Infusion, man.
Well,
because,
you could play the legendary or the Twin Princess, and you can get
you can also do that for
Power
sure.
Infusion for yourself. It's still a very consistent spec overall, and again, in terms of like popularity, it's there. But I feel like again, if more people from the S tier specs would choose Shadow, you would definitely see Shadow in S tier just in terms of numbers and presence. Right now, I would believe it's still an A tier.
It's I don't know if it's doing better than Elemental because I don't think we have enough Elemental data even
not yet.
The buffs, happened.
Yeah, we can.
If we were to do this last month style, it would probably be higher than Elemental. But I think it's fair to assume that it's at least S tier. It's definitely better than Frost Mage and probably a little bit better than Marksman as well, I would say.
No, it's a first of all, it's a really good spec for execute phases. That's one thing, and second, it really helps out in terms of like the raid utility with Vampiric Embrace. We always talk about this, but it's really important to mesh it out.
Yeah.
It has this raid group utility, which is really good. You mentioned Power Infusion, that's a no-brainer. But then again, you have like the damage profile, which is really good. And again, it is one of the more, I would say, pure single target powerhouses. Although the AoE component is decent, there's no comparison to like fights like I would say Sludgefest, which has the pure single target component plus the execute phase, which Shadow Priest really do tend to shine. That being said, I think it's still a fair game for Shadow Priest to be in the A tiers. We're getting, dangerously close to the 9.1 PTR, and I'm personally expecting some changes at least to the S tier.
There's some changes, hopefully to the bottom tiers as well, because the meta has been kind of skewed. Obviously, there's the community perception, and guys, listen, this is mostly to do with like basically the top performers, right? Pretty much every spec in the game right now has killed Nathria on Mythic. I'm almost 99% sure.
Yeah, all specs killed it. Yeah, that's one thing. And 95 percentile, that was what we were looking at, right?
With 95 percentile, we also looked at the overall percentiles to figure out exactly what most people do in Mythic, even if they don't get 4 or 5 power infusions per fight. That doesn't mean that the spec is not good, and everything was also there. Was always there. It's pretty good, and we're pretty confident with the current tier list. But again, guys, play what you like. Don't kick people. Don't force people to change roles. Although having a specific composition does help. And most of these classes have gotten their performance by being in a specific raid composition, so that also adds, a little bit of grain of salt when you judge these tier lists.
Yeah, that's the thing. If anything you can take from this tier list is a pure analysis of what happened in the week prior within the raiding scene. It shouldn't be a factor of decision, or I don't know, a heavyweight decision factor for you when making a comp for a raid or trying out a spec. All these specs that you see here are being analyzed for their 95% parses, and also from the comps that they have, which may or may not cheese on different other mechanics from other classes or fights. So this is the final picture. I would say it's looking pretty good. Cannot wait to see what 9.1 brings.
And of course, guys, you can tell us your opinion on the rankings.
I'm sure you will.
I know you want that Destrolock to be S+ tier, but it is what it is. So you can leave a comment down below letting us know what you think about the current situation of the meta. Yeah,
then the current situation of the meta is also due to our Patreons who are supporting all of this content that we do on a weekly basis. There's no other way to say it. Thank you guys from the bottom of our hearts for everything that you're doing and keeping the Marcelian&Online soul alive. We have the new podcast right now, which are focused on the specs, and we get deep dive into them as well. We have the class guides carrying on. We have the TLF shows. It's all of that you're supporting. So big thank you to you guys. If you want to check it out, you thought about becoming a Patreon, and
links down below.
Check it in the description. Big shout out to our Twitch family as well. The subs, the viewers, everybody that
it's been pretty cool. We had some pretty awesome streams in the last couple of weeks where we just talked about the meta, talked about the specs and everything, and obviously play all the goddamn specs, man.
And Discord gang, don't forget about the Discord gang. Big salute to them as well, and you for watching. Thank you
very much.
Now you know what you have to do. Go and have a great weekend. All right? Peace. I said it. Do it.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day. day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.